The Arizona Territory, 1884, was a land where beauty and danger walked side by side. Endless golden plains stretched beneath the blazing sun, broken only by towering red cliffs and ancient forests of pine. Every traveler knew that surviving here required courage, luck, and sometimes a miracle. On the edge of a small frontier town stood a white wooden church decorated with wildflowers. The townspeople had gathered to celebrate what they believed would be the wedding of the year. 22-year-old Clara Bennett stood quietly near the altar wearing a simple ivory wedding dress that had belonged to her late mother. Although everyone admired her beauty, no one noticed the sadness hidden behind her gentle smile. Clara wasn't marrying for love. Her widowed father had fallen deep into debt after years of failed harvests, and a wealthy ranch owner, Harold Whitmore, had offered to erase every dollar they owed if Clara became his wife. Harold was nearly twice her age. He was respected by many in town because of his wealth, but Clara had seen another side of him. She had watched him threaten poor farmers, cheat neighboring ranchers, and speak of the Apache people with nothing but hatred. Every instinct told her she was making a terrible mistake, but refusing the marriage would leave her father with nothing. The church bells rang softly as the preacher opened his Bible. "My dear friends," he began, "we are gathered here today." Clara tried to listen, but her hands trembled. Hidden beneath the inner lining of her wedding dress was a small leather pouch. She had discovered it only the night before while repairing a loose seam. Inside were an old silver pendant shaped like an eagle, a faded photograph of a young couple she had never seen before, and a folded note with writing too faded to read. She had planned to examine it after the wedding, never imagining it could change her life. Outside, a hot wind swept across the valley. The horses tied near the church became restless, stamping their hooves and pulling against their reins. Then came a distant sound. Hoof beats. Fast. Dozens of them. One of the townsmen rushed to the church door and looked toward the hills. His face instantly turned pale. "Riders," he shouted. "Apache riders." Panic exploded inside the church. Women grabbed their children. Men reached for rifles leaning against the walls. Guests overturned benches as they rushed toward the exits. Harold Whitmore cursed loudly and snatched a revolver from his belt. "They've come to attack us," he yelled. But no one stopped to ask why the riders had come. Outside, nearly 20 Apache warriors raced through the valley. They moved with incredible speed, heading straight toward a nearby corral where several horses had been kept. Leading them was a tall warrior with sharp, watchful eyes named Tarzan. His face remained calm, focused only on the animals. "We take only what belongs to our people," he called to his warriors. The horses in the corral had been stolen from Apache families only days earlier. Tarzan had no interest in harming innocent townspeople. He wanted the horses back before more blood was shed. Unfortunately, fear moved faster than truth. The first gunshot echoed through the valley. Then another. Within seconds, smoke filled the air. Terrified horses broke free from their fences, charging through the streets. People screamed and scattered in every direction. Inside the church, Clara tried to help an elderly woman escape through a side door. Suddenly, a frightened horse crashed into the front porch, splintering the wooden support beams. The roof groaned. "Run!" someone screamed. Before Clara could move, a heavy timber broke loose and crashed down beside her. The impact threw her to the floor. A sharp piece of wood struck her shoulder, and pain shot through her body. Dust filled the room as pieces of the ceiling continued to fall. Her vision blurred. Outside, Tarzan heard the cries coming from the church. Ignoring the gunfire aimed in his direction, he leaped from his horse and ran toward the collapsing building. He found Clara trapped beneath a fallen beam, barely conscious. Blood stained the white fabric of her wedding dress. Without hesitation, he lifted the beam away and carefully carried her outside. She was barely breathing. Tawser knew the wound had to be treated immediately. As the Apache healer prepared clean cloth and medicinal herbs, Tawser carefully loosened the damaged portion of Clara's wedding dress to reach the injury. That was when his fingers touched something hidden inside the fabric. A small leather pouch. He stared at it in stunned silence. Whatever was sewn into that wedding dress was far more valuable than anyone in the town could have imagined, and it was about to uncover a secret buried for more than 20 years. The Apache camp lay deep within the mountains, hidden among towering pine trees and towering cliffs that few outsiders could find. A cool breeze carried the scent of cedar and sage through the valley as evening settled over the land. Inside a large lodge, Clara Bennett slowly opened her eyes. Everything around her felt unfamiliar. Instead of the white walls of the church, she saw thick wooden poles covered with animal hides. A small fire burned nearby, filling the room with warmth. Bundles of dried herbs hung from the ceiling, releasing a soothing fragrance into the air. For a brief moment she wondered if she had died. Then the pain in her shoulder reminded her she was very much alive. She tried to sit up, but a sharp ache forced her back onto the blankets. An elderly Apache woman noticed the movement and walked over with a gentle smile. She carried a wooden bowl filled with water. "You awake?" the woman said softly in broken English. Clara's heart raced. Where am I?" The woman pointed outside. Apache camp. Fear immediately flooded Clara's mind. Since childhood, she had heard frightening stories about the Apache. Townspeople claimed they were ruthless warriors who attacked without mercy. She had believed every word. Her eyes searched desperately for a way out. The old woman seemed to understand. "No fear," she whispered. "You safe." Just then, the entrance flap opened. The tall Apache warrior Clara had briefly seen before losing consciousness stepped inside. It was Tawser. He removed his bow before entering and kept a respectful distance. "You are awake," he said calmly. Clara pulled the blanket tightly around herself. "Why did you bring me here?" "You were dying. You kidnapped me." Tawser shook his head. "If I leave you inside church, you die." His voice carried no anger, only simple honesty. Clara remembered the collapsing roof, the fallen beam, the darkness. Slowly, fragments of the terrible afternoon returned. "My father," she whispered. "I do not know." "And Harold?" "I do not know." Tears gathered in Clara's eyes. For several minutes neither of them spoke. Finally Tawser reached into a leather bag and carefully placed the small pouch she had found inside her wedding dress onto the blanket beside her. "This belonged to you." Clara stared at it in surprise. "You didn't open it." "I looked only enough to know it was hidden." She carefully untied the leather cord. Inside were the silver eagle pendant, the faded photograph, and the folded note she had discovered before the wedding. The photograph showed a smiling young couple holding a tiny baby wrapped in a blanket. The baby wore the very same silver pendant now resting in Clara's hand. Her breathing became uneven. "I've never seen these people before." Tawser quietly studied the picture. "They look familiar." Clara looked at him. "You know them?" "I think, maybe." He pointed toward the eagle pendant. "This symbol is old, very old." "You've seen it?" "My grandfather carried one like this." Clara frowned. "That can't be possible." Taza remained silent for a long moment before speaking again. My grandfather told stories of a peace meeting many winters ago. What kind of meeting? Apache leaders and settler families. He paused. One family disappeared after soldiers attacked. Clara felt a chill run through her body. My father never told me anything about this. Maybe he does not know. The old healer returned carrying fresh bandages. She gently changed the dressing on Clara's injured shoulder while speaking quietly to Taza in Apache. When she finished, Taza translated. She says your wound is healing, but you must rest. Clara nodded. As darkness settled outside, strange thoughts filled her mind. Why had someone hidden these items inside her mother's wedding dress? Who were the people in the photograph? Why did the pendant resemble one owned by Taza's grandfather? Nothing made sense anymore. Meanwhile, miles away, the frontier town was in chaos. Harold Whitmore stood outside the damaged church, his expensive coat covered in dust. One of his hired men approached. We searched everywhere. And the girl is gone. Harold's jaw tightened. What about the pouch? The man lowered his voice. We couldn't find it. For the first time, fear crossed Harold's face. You fool, he hissed. If the Apache discover what's inside, everything I spent 20 years hiding will be destroyed. Back in the mountains, Clara held the silver pendant tightly in her hand as she stared into the fire. She had always believed she knew exactly who she was. Now, for the first time in her life, she wasn't certain of anything. Outside the lodge, Taza stood beneath the stars. His grandfather's final words echoed in his memory. One day, the child wearing the eagle will return. When that day comes, protect her, because the truth will decide the future of both our people. Taza looked toward the lodge where Clara rested. He now understood that saving her life had been only the beginning. A much greater journey and a far more dangerous secret was waiting for them both. 3 days passed before Clara was strong enough to leave the lodge. The morning sun painted the mountains in shades of gold, and a cool breeze swept through the Apache camp. Children laughed as they chased one another between the teepees. Women prepared meals over open fires while elders carved tools and told stories beneath the shade of ancient cottonwood trees. Clara stepped outside carefully, her injured shoulder still wrapped in clean bandages. She expected hostile stares wherever she went. Instead, most people simply smiled politely or nodded before continuing their work. The sight confused her. These were not the savage people she had been taught to fear. An elderly woman handed her a wooden cup filled with warm herbal tea. For strength, she said with a kind smile. Clara accepted it quietly. Thank you. Across the camp, Taza was repairing his saddle. When he noticed Clara walking, he stood and approached. You feel stronger? A little. He pointed toward a rocky trail leading above the valley. Walk with me. For a moment Clara hesitated, but curiosity overcame fear. They climbed the narrow path until they reached a high cliff overlooking the endless plains below. From there, the entire valley stretched toward the distant horizon. It's beautiful, Clara whispered. Taza nodded. My people have lived here many generations. After a long silence, Clara finally asked the question that had been troubling her. If your people only wanted your horses back, why did everyone believe you attacked the town? Taza sighed. Because someone wanted them to believe it. He reached into a leather satchel and unfolded a rough map. Several areas had been marked with charcoal. These valleys once belonged to Apache families. Clara studied the map. What happened? Settlers came. Some wanted peace. And the others? They wanted land. He pointed toward a large section near the river. Your future husband owns much of this now. Clara frowned. Harold told everyone he bought it legally. Taza looked directly into her eyes. He lies. Clara wanted to argue. Instead, she remembered Harold threatening struggling farmers and forcing families from their homes. For the first time, doubt replaced loyalty. Back at the camp, an old Apache elder approached carrying a weathered wooden box. My grandfather left this, Tarza explained. He said it should remain hidden until the girl with the eagle pendant returned. Clara's heart pounded. Inside the box lay faded journals, old letters, and a carefully folded treaty written decades earlier. Although time had yellowed the pages, several names remained readable. One name immediately caught Clara's attention. Samuel Bennett. My father. Tosser shook his head. No. He pointed farther down the page. This Samuel Bennett signed as a witness. Clara continued reading. The treaty described an agreement between several Apache leaders and peaceful settler families. Together they promised to share water sources, protect travelers, and avoid unnecessary violence. Attached to the final page was another photograph. It showed the same young couple Clara had seen before. This time, however, a handwritten note appeared beneath it. Thomas and Mary Collins with their daughter, Clara. Clara froze. My name? Her hands began shaking. My last name isn't Collins. Taza remained silent. She quickly searched through the remaining papers until she found another letter. The ink had faded, but she could still read parts of it. If anything happens to us, please protect our little Clara. Raise her as your own until peace returns. The letter was signed by Thomas Collins. Tears filled Clara's eyes. My father. Father spoke gently. Samuel Bennett did raise you. But he wasn't my real father. No. She looked toward the mountains, trying to understand everything she had believed for 22 years. Samuel Bennett had never treated her differently. He had loved her, protected her, cared for her after every childhood illness. Whether or not they shared blood suddenly seemed less important. He kept his promise, she whispered. Taza nodded respectfully. He honored your parents. At that very moment, miles away, Harold Whitmore sat inside his large ranch house with 2 armed deputies. One of the men placed a map on the table. The Apache camp is somewhere in these mountains. Harold stared coldly at it. Burn every lodge if you must. One deputy hesitated. There are women and children. I don't care. What if the girl is there? Harold's expression darkened. Especially if the girl is there. The deputies exchanged uneasy glances. Harold leaned closer. That girl cannot discover who her real family was. Back in the Apache camp, Clara walked alone beside a quiet stream. She held the eagle pendant in her hand while watching its reflection shimmer in the water. Everything had changed. She no longer knew where she truly belonged. She wasn't fully Apache. She wasn't truly the daughter of the family who had raised her. She stood somewhere between 2 worlds. Footsteps approached behind her. It was Tosser. You are not alone, he said quietly. Clara looked at him. All my life I believed one story. And now I don't know what to believe. Taza smiled gently. Believe what you see. She looked around the peaceful camp, the children laughing, the elders teaching, the women preparing food together. The hatred she had carried since childhood slowly began to disappear. For the first time, she saw the Apache not as enemies but as families fighting to protect their homes. Just then, a young Apache stopped raced into the camp on horseback. He barely stopped before shouting, "Riders!" The camp instantly fell silent. "What did you see?" Tazar asked. "More than 30 armed men." "How far?" "Less than an hour." Tazar's expression hardened. He turned toward Clara. "They are coming." "Who?" The scout answered before Tazar could speak. "Harold Whitmore, and he is bringing enough men to wipe out every person in this valley." Clara felt the blood drain from her face. She realized the man she had almost married was not searching for his missing bride. He was coming to erase the truth forever. A heavy silence settled over the Apache camp after the scout delivered his warning. Even the children stopped playing. The elders exchanged worried glances, and the women quickly gathered the youngest members of the tribe into the safety of the lodges. Tazar climbed onto a large boulder in the center of the camp. "Everyone remain calm," he called. "No one acts out of fear. We protect our families first." His steady voice eased the panic, but everyone understood the danger was real. Harold Whitmore was not coming to negotiate. He was coming to destroy. Within minutes, the camp became a place of quiet preparation. Warriors sharpened arrows, checked bowstrings, and saddled horses. Others carefully moved food, medicine, and blankets into hidden caves known only to the tribe. Clara watched everything with growing admiration. There was no shouting, no chaos, only discipline. She turned to Tazar. "I have to speak to Harold." Tazar looked at her in disbelief. "He will not listen. He has to. You do not know the man anymore." Clara lowered her eyes. Deep inside, she knew Tazar was right. The man she had once believed was simply proud and stubborn had become something much darker. Nearly an hour later, Tazar and several warriors climbed a rocky ridge overlooking the valley. Below them, a long line of riders appeared through the dust. Harold Whitmore led the group. From the front, behind him rode more than 30 armed men carrying rifles and ammunition. Several wore deputy badges. Others were hired guns known across the territory for taking any job if the price was high enough. Harold raised his horse and smiled coldly as he looked toward the mountains. "There they are," he said. One of the deputies rode beside him. "Should we offer them a chance to surrender?" Harold laughed. "I didn't ride all this way to negotiate." He reached into his saddle bag and removed a folded paper. It was the original peace treaty, the one Clara had discovered another copy of in the Apache camp. "This piece of paper has caused enough trouble." Without hesitation, he held it over a lantern flame. The edges blackened. Within seconds, the treaty turned to ash and scattered into the wind. "What matters now," Harold said, "is making sure no witnesses survive." Back in the Apache camp, Clara sat inside Tazar's lodge reading through the old journals once more. One page had been overlooked. It described the night her parents died. According to the journal, Thomas and Mary Collins had discovered that several dishonest businessmen planned to steal Apache horses, blame the tribe for future attacks, and use the violence as an excuse to seize more land. Thomas had gathered proof. Before he could expose the conspiracy, he and his wife were ambushed while traveling home. Their baby daughter had survived only because Samuel Bennett found her hidden beneath a wagon covered with blankets. Samuel raised her as his own to keep her safe. Clara closed the journal with trembling hands. So Harold knew. Tazar nodded. His father was one of the men named in the journal. Everything suddenly made sense. The forced marriage. The hidden pouch. Harold hadn't wanted Clara as his wife because he loved her. He wanted to control the last living witness connected to the truth. That evening, Tawser gathered the tribal council. "We cannot outrun them forever," one elder said. "They have too many rifles." Another elder replied, "If we fight in the open, many will die." The discussion continued for nearly an hour. Finally, Tawser spoke. "We defend only if attacked." Some younger warriors objected. "They burned our villages before. They stole our horses. They deserve revenge." Tawser shook his head firmly. "Revenge creates another war." His calm words silenced the council. Clara watched him with growing respect. She realized true strength wasn't measured by anger. It was measured by self-control. As darkness covered the valley, a lone rider quietly approached the camp. The sentries stopped him immediately. It was Daniel Brooks, one of Harold's ranch hands. He climbed off his exhausted horse and raised both hands. "I don't want trouble," he said. "I came to warn you." Tawser cautiously stepped forward. "What warning?" Daniel looked around nervously. "Harold plans to attack before sunrise." Clara recognized him. "Daniel, why are you helping us?" His face filled with guilt. "Because I helped Harold years ago." The camp fell silent. "I believed his lies," Daniel continued. "I helped move stolen horses. I watched innocent people get blamed. I stayed quiet because I was afraid." He removed a small leather notebook from inside his coat. "I can't change the past, but maybe this can." Inside the notebook were names, payments, and dates proving Harold had bribed officials, hired outlaws, and staged attacks for nearly 20 years. It was the evidence they desperately needed. Before anyone could celebrate, an Apache warrior suddenly drew his knife. His name was Chayton. Without warning, he grabbed Daniel from behind and pressed the blade against his throat. "Traitor!" Chayton shouted. Everyone froze. Tawser stepped forward slowly. "Release him." "No." Chayton's eyes burned with anger. "He works for Whitmore." Daniel remained perfectly still. "I used to." Tawser noticed something strange. Chayton wasn't looking at Daniel. He kept glancing toward the hills, as if waiting for someone. Tawser's instincts sharpened. "Search him." Two warriors quickly disarmed Chayton. Hidden inside his clothing they found several gold coins and a folded note. Tawser opened it. The message contained only one sentence. "Signal us when the camp sleeps. Your payment will be doubled after the chief is dead." The camp gasped. Chayton had betrayed his own people. The warrior lowered his head in shame. "They promised my family food after the winter." Tawser looked at him with sorrow instead of hatred. "You should have come to me." "I was ashamed." Tawser ordered that Chayton be tied under guard until sunrise. There would be justice, but not revenge. As the camp settled into uneasy silence, Clara stared toward the dark mountains. Harold's army was waiting just beyond the hills. Now they possessed the proof needed to expose his crimes. But they also knew he had a spy inside the camp, and sunrise was only a few hours away. The battle for the truth was about to begin. The first light of dawn crept over the mountains, turning the sky shades of orange and crimson. A cool mist covered the valley, hiding the Apache camp beneath a blanket of fog. Every man, woman, and child was awake. No one spoke above a whisper. Tarzan stood beside the entrance of the camp, his bow hanging across his back. Around him, the warriors waited patiently behind rocks and pine trees, hidden from view. They had no desire for war, but they were prepared to defend their families. Clara stepped beside him, holding the leather notebook Daniel Brooks had surrendered the night before. "These pages can expose Harold," she said quietly. Tarzan looked toward the valley below. "If he listens." Clara sighed. "I don't think he came here to listen." Before sunrise fully broke, the distant sound of hoofbeats echoed through the mountains. Harold Whitmore and his riders emerged from the fog. More than 30 armed men spread across the valley, surrounding the camp from 3 directions. Harold rode to the front, stopping just beyond the reach of an arrow. His cold eyes searched until they found Clara. "There you are," he called. Clara stepped into the open. "I'm here. Come back where you belong." "I never belonged to you." Harold's face tightened. "You don't understand what these people are," Clara answered firmly. "I do now." Harold laughed bitterly. "They've poisoned your mind." "No," Clara replied. "You lied to me my entire life." She held up the old treaty in Daniel's notebook. "I know about the stolen horses. I know about my parents. I know who really started the violence." For the first time, uncertainty crossed Harold's face. Several of his own deputies exchanged nervous glances. Harold quickly recovered. "She's lying." Clara opened the notebook and began reading aloud. "Payments made to hired gunmen. Money given to corrupt officials. Orders to steal Apache horses. Orders to burn farms and blame the Apache." Every sentence made Harold's men more uncomfortable. One deputy slowly lowered his rifle. Another looked toward Harold in disbelief. "Tell us she's lying," the deputy demanded. Harold hesitated. The single moment of silence spoke louder than any confession. Daniel Brooks rode forward from the Apache camp. "I helped him," Daniel admitted. "I was afraid to tell the truth." He faced the deputies. "But every word you read is true." The valley became silent. Finally, one of the older deputies removed the silver star from his coat. "I won't fight for a murderer." He tossed the badge onto the ground. 2 more men lowered their rifles. Then another. Within moments, nearly half of Harold's force refused to continue. Harold's face burned with rage. "Cowards!" he shouted. He drew his revolver and pointed it directly at Clara. "If I can't silence the truth—" A gunshot exploded across the valley. But it wasn't at Harold's. One of his own deputies fired first, knocking the revolver from Harold's hand. The weapon spun through the air and landed in the dirt. Harold turned and tried to flee on horseback. "Stop him," Clara cried. Tosser leaped onto his horse and raced after him. The chase thundered through narrow mountain trails lined with towering cliffs. Harold knew the land poorly. Tarzan knew every rock and every turn. Desperate, Harold fired a second hidden pistol over his shoulder. The bullet struck a tree only inches from Tarzan. Tarzan refused to return fire. Instead, he urged his horse forward. The trail narrowed beside a deep canyon. Harold's frightened horse slipped on loose stones. The animal stumbled, throwing Harold hard onto the rocky ground. Before he could stand, Tarzan arrived. He drew his knife, then stopped. Harold stared at him. "Finish it," he sneered. "You've won." Tawser slowly lowered the blade. My people have buried enough hatred. Instead of killing him, Tawser tied Harold's hands with a leather rope. Justice would decide his fate, not revenge. Back in the valley, the remaining deputies gathered around Clara. She handed them the journals, the treaty, and Daniel's notebook. One deputy carefully examined the documents. "This is enough," he said quietly. "Enough to clear the Apache, and enough to put Harold Whitmore on trial." The old Apache elders stepped forward beside several honest settlers who had followed the deputies into the mountains. For the first time in decades, they stood together without weapons raised. An elderly settler removed his hat. "My father signed this peace treaty." An Apache elder nodded. "So did mine." Neither man spoke for several seconds. Then, slowly, they shook hands. Clara watched with tears in her eyes. Everything her real parents had sacrificed their lives to protect was finally beginning to heal. As the morning sun rose above the mountains, the valley no longer echoed with gunfire. Instead, it echoed with something far more powerful: the sound of enemies choosing peace. Yet Clary knew one final chapter remained. Harold's crimes had been exposed, but the future of both the settlers and the Apache would depend on what happened after justice was served. 3 months later, autumn arrived in the Arizona Territory. The once divided valley looked different. The smoke of burned homes had been replaced by the sound of hammers, children's laughter, and horses working peacefully in the fields. Settlers and Apache families who had once feared each other now worked side by side to rebuild what years of hatred had destroyed. At the territorial courthouse, people filled every seat for the trial of Harold Whitmore. Clara sat quietly beside Tawser and Daniel Brooks as the judge reviewed the evidence. The leather notebook, the old peace treaty, the journals, and the testimony of several former deputies revealed a pattern of deception stretching back nearly 20 years. Witness after witness described stolen horses, burned farms, forged land claims, and attacks falsely blamed on the Apache. Daniel admitted his own part in the conspiracy and accepted responsibility for his actions, asking only that the truth finally be known. Harold tried to deny everything, but every lie was answered with another piece of evidence. When the verdict was announced, the courtroom fell silent. Harold Whitmore was found guilty of fraud, conspiracy, theft, and arranging violent attacks against both settlers and Apache families. His ranch, built through deception and stolen land, was confiscated by the territorial government. As guards led him away, Harold looked back at Clara. "I could have given you everything," he said bitterly. Clara met his eyes calmly. "You never understood that the one thing I wanted couldn't be bought." Harold lowered his head and disappeared through the courtroom doors. Weeks later, government officials began returning land that had been taken illegally. While not every injustice could be undone, the decision marked the beginning of a new relationship between the Apache and neighboring settlements. A council was formed with leaders from both communities. Tawser represented the Apache. Several respected settlers, including Samuel Bennett, represented the town. When Clara saw Samuel again, emotion overwhelmed them both. Without saying a word, she ran into his arms. He held her tightly. "I thought I'd lost you," he whispered. "You never lost me," Clara replied through tears. "You'll always be my father." Samuel smiled. "I may not have given you life, Clara, but raising you has been the greatest blessing of mine." Those words healed a wound that had nothing to do with blood. As winter approached, Clara proposed an idea inspired by the dream her birth parents had once shared. She wanted to build a small school where Apache and settler children could learn together. Some people doubted it would work. Others feared old prejudices would return. But Tazar believed in her vision. If children grow together, he said, they will not inherit the hatred of their parents. Volunteers from both communities donated timber, tools, and labor. The building rose on a peaceful hill overlooking the valley, a place that belonged to neither side alone, but to everyone. When the school finally opened, children entered with curious smiles instead of fear. They learned to read and write in English while also hearing Apache stories, songs, and traditions from the tribal elders. They discovered that different cultures could exist side by side without one destroying the other. For Clara, every lesson taught inside those walls honored both the family who had given her life and the family who had raised her. One quiet evening, Clara and Tazar climbed the same rocky overlook where they had first spoken honestly with one another. The valley below glowed in the warm light of the setting sun. "It looks different now," Clara said. Tazar smiled. "The land is the same." She looked at him. "But the people have changed." For a moment, neither spoke. Then Tazar reached into a small leather pouch and removed the silver eagle pendant. "It belongs to you," he said. Clara shook her head gently. "It belongs to both of our stories." She fastened the pendant around her neck, where it rested above her heart. "It reminded us of the past," she said. "Now let it remind us of the future." Tazar nodded. Together they watched children from both communities playing in the valley below. There was no fear in their laughter. No walls between them. Only friendship. Years later, travelers passing through the Arizona territory often stopped at the little school on the hill. Many asked why an old wedding dress was displayed inside a wooden glass case near the entrance. A small plaque beneath it read, "This dress once hid the truth." When the truth was finally revealed, it ended years of hatred and began a lasting peace. Visitors would quietly read those words before looking out across the valley, where Apache and settler families now lived as neighbors instead of enemies. Clara often smiled when she saw the children running together. She realized that the greatest victory had never been defeating Harold Whitmore. The greatest victory was ending the cycle of fear and replacing it with trust. And every time the wind carried laughter across the mountains, it seemed to whisper the same timeless message. Truth can be hidden for years, but when it is finally revealed with courage and compassion, it has the power to heal even the deepest wounds. The end.